As I've previously described, Visual Basic has many numeric data types, and in all sorts of applications, you'll frequently find that you have to work with conversions, converting numbers to strings, strings to numbers, and between different numeric data types. I'll start with describing how to convert a numeric value to a string value. Each of the numeric data type classes, such as integer, double, byte, and so on, have a method named toString. The toString method is called from an instance of the class, and when you declare a numeric variable, it's an instance of one of these data type classes. The toString method is sometimes called implicitly, that is, you don't actually have to write the code. In this example, I've declared a variable int value as an integer and assigned it a literal value of 55. Then I simply pass that value to a variable data typed as a string. In this case, I don't have to call the toString method. It's called for me. But there are other cases where you have to call toString. For example, if you want to combine a string and a number into another string, you'll need to call toString explicitly. In this code, my variable str value is created by combining a literal string, value : space, with the value of the integer, and I'm calling the toString method. If I don't call the toString method in this case, I'll get a programming exception. You'll also need to convert strings to numbers. For example, if a user is working with a data entry form and types in a numeric value, in many cases you'll need to explicitly convert that for them. To do this, each of the numeric data type classes has a parse method. You call this method from the class, not from an instance of the class. It's what's sometimes known as a static method. Use the target data type class that represents the kind of number you want. In this code, I'm starting with a string value, and I'm passing it into the parse method of the integer class, and I get back an integer value that I assign to the variable. Make sure that the string you're trying to convert can be converted. That is, that it represents a valid numeric format, and that the value fits into the range of the target data type. If you want to check for numeric compatibility before you convert, call the isNumeric function. You can call this function anywhere. You pass in a value, and it returns true if the value can be parsed as numeric and false if it can't. You can use isNumeric on strings and on numeric values. You can also convert numbers to numbers. If you're converting from a less precise data type, say an integer, to a more precise type, such as a double, we call that widening. You can widen a value implicitly and safely without risking data loss. In this example, I'm starting off with an integer and converting it to a double. Because I'm going from less precise to more precise, I'm widening, and I don't need to add any extra conversion code. This sort of conversion is always safe, so you typically don't need to wrap the code inside try-catch blocks or do other error handling. Going in the other direction, though, is another story. If you're going from a more precise data type to a less precise type, you can lose data or cause exceptions. Let's take the example of going from a double value with a fraction to an integer. In this case, the number will be rounded or truncated if possible. You'll lose the precision, but you won't cause a programming exception. On the other hand, if the result after the conversion exceeds the range of the target data type, you will get a programming exception. This behavior is different than many other programming languages. In Java, for example, if you start with a byte, which has a maximum value of 255, and you add 1, instead of getting 256, it'll wrap around and become 0. In Visual Basic, that operation causes an exception, so you need to make absolutely sure you know what the values are and that they match the available range. To convert values when narrowing, there are two sets of conversion functions available. One older set of functions that came from Visual Basic 6 and has been implemented in the latest versions of Visual Basic, and one that was added in visualbasic.net. The older set of conversion functions are called the built-in conversion functions. They all start with the letter C for convert and then end with the target data type. So you have cint for integers, cdouble for doubles, and so on. The newer set of methods are members of a class called convert. They're called toInteger, toDouble, and so on. In general, you'll get more precise error messages by using the convert class methods, and they're generally recommended over the older built-in conversion functions. Now let's take a look at a little bit of code. I'm working in a project called Converting Numbers, and I've already declared 4 variables: a byte, an integer, a double, and a string. I'll start with string conversion. I'm getting the string value from the text input box's text property. So it'll be whatever I type when I run the application. Now I'll create a variable called int from string. And I'll data type it as an integer. And I'll get its value by parsing the string value, calling integer.parse, and I'll pass in str1. Then I'll call my output method, and I'll pass in uEntered, and then a space, and then I'll append to that the new integer variable, and I'll call its toString method explicitly. I'll test the code, and I'll type in a numeric value of 1024, and I'll click Go. Now, as long as I type in an actual numeric value, everything's fine, but if I type in a value that can't be parsed as a number, I'll get an error. So I'm going to get out of debug mode here, and I'm going to wrap this code inside a try-catch block. And I'll use the isNumeric function, and I'll ask, isNumeric str1. After typing the keyword then, I press enter, and I get an end if clause. And then I'll move this code into the if and if section. Now, if the isNumeric function returns true, everything's good, but if it returns false, I need to handle that. So I'll put in a keyword called else, and here I'll output my own error message. The value isn't numeric. I'll run the code, I'll type in a numeric value, and I'll click Go, and I see a successful result. Then once again, I'll type in a string value, and click Go again, and I get back my error message. The value isn't numeric. So that's how you convert from a string to a number using the parse method, and from a number to a string using the toString method. Now let's do an example of converting from one numeric data type to another. I'll move the cursor down below the if and if section, but still staying within this subroutine, and I'll add a new bit of code where I take an integer value and convert it to a double. So I'm going from less precise to more precise, and I'm widening the value. I'll create a variable called dbl2, and I'll set its data type to double. And I'll simply assign int1. Then I'll output the value, appending it to a label of the value of double 2 is. I'll run the code, I'll click the Go button, and I get the value of double 2 is 55. So the value is retained, and I didn't have to do anything special to do the conversion because I'm widening the value. Now I'll do a narrowing conversion. I'll declare a variable called byte2, and I'll set its data type to byte, and I'll call the method convert.toByte, and I'll pass in the value of int1. Now, as long as the value of the integer is within the range of the byte, it's going to work fine. I'm going to copy and paste this output line, and I'll change both the label and the value that I'm converting. I'll say that the value of byte 2 is byte2.string. I'll run the code, I'll click the button, and there's the result. It still works. But let's see what happens if the original value of the integer was 256, one more than the available range of the byte data type. Now I would get an error. So I'm going to wrap this code inside a try-catch block. And just as I did before, if I get into the exception section, I'll output the error message, but this time I'll use the error message that's being reported by the convert class using this expression, output ex.message. Ex is a variable that's declared in the catch clause. I'll run the code, I'll click the button, and I get back the error message, value was either too large or too small for an unsigned byte. So that's a look at various ways of doing conversions, from numbers to strings, from strings to numbers, and between different numeric data types. For numeric conversion, use the convert classes methods rather than the older built-in functions. And for strings and numbers, use parse and toString.